Good afternoon and welcome to Capital Account. I'm Lauren Lister here in Washington, D.C. These are your headlines for Tuesday, May 22nd, 2012. Regulators were on Capitol Hill today from the SEC and the CFTC to talk about how that overhaul of that $600 trillion opaque, unregulated, over-the-counter derivatives market is going. As you know, derivatives were, of course, at the center of the J.P. Morgan trading blow-up, so the loss has seemingly reignited scrutiny from Washington. But here's a caveat before you get too hopeful about the Senate Banking Committee. Guess who has reportedly been the single biggest donor to the chair of this committee? Yeah, that's right, J.P. Morgan. We'll talk about it. And who's the regulator we really want to hear from? How about the one that oversees America's largest banks, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, the OCC? It reportedly pledged to take a more aggressive approach to regulation after the agency caught heat for being lax in the run-up to the 2008 crash. Now, it's obviously facing some questions about follow-through. William K. Black will help us understand why it's been the watchdog that won't do this. Bark. And the U.S.'s largest foreign creditor, China, can now bypass Wall Street altogether and buy U.S. government debt straight from the U.S. Treasury, making this the Treasury's first ever direct relationship with a foreign government. That's all according to Reuters. We will discuss it. Let's get to today's Capital Account. Our next guest has called regulators such as the Office of Comptroller of the Currency and the Federal Reserve the dogs that once again failed to bark in J.P. Morgan's trading loss, that multi-billion-dollar trading loss. Those are J.P. Morgan's main regulators. Now, meanwhile, it was two other regulators we heard from on Capitol Hill today, the SEC and the CFTC, on derivatives reform, and of course, J.P. Morgan was a large focus of the hearing. Now, officials said investigations of J.P. Morgan are underway at both of their agencies. Fittingly, news comes out that J.P. Morgan has hired a former SEC enforcement chief to assist the firm in probes of its loss on credit derivatives trading, according to reports. How fitting. This just all is one incestuous big circle. To talk more about it, William K. Black is here. He's Associate Professor of Economics and Law at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. And it's really so great to talk to you because you are the expert on all of these regulatory issues, which just never seem to make sense when we have something like a hearing on the Hill today. First of all, thanks so much for being on the show.
Thank you.
Okay, so Professor Black, today we hear on the Hill the SEC and the CFTC top officials saying, hey, we learned about this J.P. Morgan trade from press reports. And then as far as the main regulator of the banks, or one of them, the OCC, at first, officials were coming out saying this trade would have been allowed under the Volcker rule. Then a week later, according to reports, they disowned that position and said, hey, more information's come out. We don't know. We take that back. Standing back and watching all this, it sounds like they're either incompetent or complicit. In your view, in your experience, which do you think it is?
Well, it's far more complicity. The Federal Reserve and the Treasury and the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency is a bureau within Treasury. Were two of the leading opponents of the Volcker rule. So Treasury Secretary Geithner, the boss of the OCC, hates the Volcker rule, and the Fed hates the Volcker rule. And the reason, of course, is that both entities, Treasury and the Federal Reserve, are so heavily aligned with the interest of the largest banks in the world, the systemically dangerous institutions.
And then on the flip side of this, you have the Senate Banking Committee holding this hearing today, and a lot of the media outlets have been previewing that this is where Jamie Dimon will testify soon. You have the chairman, who, according to the Center for Responsive Politics, can thank J.P. Morgan as his largest campaign contributor. So should we take a hearing like this seriously at all, or is it just a dog and pony show?
Well, you should take it as possibly serious. It's amazing, sometimes even in dog and pony shows, people blunder so badly that they can hurt themselves tremendously. It is true that finance is the leading contributor to both political parties. And it's certainly true that, for example, House Finance Committee is now gargantuan. I mean, you look physically, and the seats just for the members swallow the hall in which they meet. And the reason is that committee has been expanded dramatically. And the reason the committee has been expanded dramatically in size is because if you're put on that committee, you will get a fortune in campaign contributions. So both political parties, when they have someone elected in a close race that could be easily contested, they tend to put them on that committee to give them a leg up in fundraising. And that's how sick the world is, that the committee isn't there to protect us, it's to give you a leg up.
And maybe not for their expertise either. I thought it was a little bit shocking, just anecdotally, to hear one of the lawmakers today asking whether the SEC and CFTC were doing a civil or a criminal probe, not knowing, presumably, that the SEC couldn't do a criminal probe of J.P. Morgan, which I thought was a little odd. On that note of accountability, though, okay, so the OCC and the Fed, we'll talk about them. They're J.P. Morgan's main bank regulators. Here's what the SEC, though, said they had responsibility over with regards to J.P. Morgan's trading loss, according to Mary Schapiro in that hearing today. Let's take a listen.
When they talked about their potential, all the risks that they faced as a business, when they talk about potential losses under their VAR model, we are very focused on the accuracy and the timeliness of that disclosure.
So she mentions the VAR models, the value at risk, and that this is where they would have come into play as having some oversight. Now, we know that J.P. Morgan, their risk models, the VAR models within the CIO, the London Wales office, they changed those models. Then they announced this trading loss. Then Jamie Dimon said, hey, and we're going back to those old models. We don't know a lot about how or why or what went into that. But in your view, did the SEC mess up here? Did they miss this?
Well, first, the broader point. It's very strange that Congress is starting with the SEC and the CFTC, the Commodities Future Trading Commission, because they are not the direct regulators of J.P. Morgan.
Right. At
best, they are ancillary to this story. And so, you should be starting with the bank regulators who should have the fundamental expertise about what actually happened here. And that would be particularly important because J.P. Morgan's FLACs have been putting out all the information. And they put out at least 4 stories, each of which contradicts the other, and each of which is financially illiterate. So, they're not true, any of those 4 stories. And we've heard nothing from the regulators who are supposed to know about what actually happened. And how could you start with a discussion by the SEC and the Commodities Future Trading Commission when you still have no idea what actually happened?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with your broader point. As far as the SEC, which obviously has a very tangential role as not a regulator of the bank, do you think that they missed anything with at least the risk reporting of J.P. Morgan and the value at risk models that were changed?
I think they missed something far broader, and that is that J.P. Morgan has fundamentally been lying for years about what it does. So J.P. Morgan, in fact, runs a huge speculative betting operation, primarily on financial derivatives. And there's a Bloomberg story today that says that they have more speculative positions in non-governmental securities and derivatives than the next 3 largest banks have combined. And it says also that J.P. Morgan has been massively increasing the percentage of its portfolio in these very risky derivatives. Now, that is precisely what the Volcker Rule was designed to prevent. And the Volcker rule fundamentally should have support all across the political spectrum, in particular from conservatives and libertarians. Because what it says is, if we're going to federally subsidize you, and we do if you're a bank through deposit insurance, that's the express subsidy, but for an institution like J.P. Morgan, which is too big to fail, we have a vastly greater implicit federal subsidy of too big to fail. That means they can borrow money from creditors far more cheaply because the creditors are not going to suffer losses, even if J.P. Morgan fails, because we, the government, will bail them out. In those circumstances, it would be outrageous to allow such an institution to gamble on derivatives, right? If they won, the authors would get rich, and if they lost, all the losses would come to the public.
And let's get into derivatives more, but first, to touch on Volcker rule, you have pointed out that the Volcker rule thus far in the draft that we have of it, which isn't final, adopts a standard of hedginess when it comes to exemptions. Could you tell us what hedginess means?
Sure. The whole purpose of the rule, again, was to keep you from owning positions with these federal subsidies where you were gambling on securities. And so there's one big exception, and it's an appropriate exception. It says if you are doing this to reduce risk through hedging, then it's okay. Except that that's not what J.P. Morgan and probably most of its fellow systemically dangerous institutions are doing. J.P. Morgan quite clearly is simply taking bets. In other words, exactly what the Volcker rule said you can't do. But here's the kicker. When they do the bet, they claim it's a derivative, a hedge. Now, a hedge is supposed to be something that offsets loss in something else and therefore minimizes risk. But as you've just seen in this fake hedge, this hedginess, instead of reducing risk, their second bet was in the same direction. So the losses didn't offset, they compounded each other. So this is a massive lying system.
A massive lying system. And when we get back from break, we're going to go to a quick break. We'll come back with you, Professor Black. We're going to talk about lying and maybe how derivatives enables some of this. Also, you know, on that note of calling this hedging, it feels like something we've been talking about in the newsroom. If it looks like a duck and acts like a duck, Wall Street banks will call it a buffalo, and a lot of people in power will believe them. How to change that, we'll talk about when we get back with William Black, Associate Professor at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. Also still ahead, calling all unemployed ninjas and Jedis. If you consider yourself either one of those or perhaps a rock star, guess what? Employers want you. We'll give you our 3 cents on the wanted ads. But first, your closing market numbers.
Drives the world.
The fear-mongering used by politicians.
Who makes decisions?
Considerable breakthrough has already been made.
Who can you trust?
No one who is imbued with a global missionary zeal.
Where are we heading?
State-controlled capitalism is called fascism.
When nobody dares to ask, we do. RT, question more.
You know how sometimes you see a story and it seems so whole and complete, you think you understand it, and then you glimpse something else. You hear or see some other part of it and realize everything you thought you knew, you don't know? I'm Tom Hartman. Welcome to The Big Picture.
Welcome to the Alona Show. We'll get the real headlines with none of the mercy. The problem with the mainstream media today is that they're completely disconnected from the viewers and from what actually matters to those viewers. And so that's why young people just don't watch TV anymore. If they want news, they go online and read it. But we're trying to take those stories that people actually care about and transfer them back to TV.
welcome back. So we had a hearing on the Hill today, and it was a good reminder about this because we always hear Dodd-Frank reform was passed, but in reality, a lot of it hasn't been put into place yet, as CFTC Chairman Gary Gensler reminded us today in regards to the overhaul of the $700 trillion derivatives market, which this agency has a role in overseeing. So you'd think, of course, naturally, since they have a role in overseeing it, that they would have a role with JP Morgan in this trading loss on credit derivatives, but Gensler says they didn't because JP Morgan isn't registered as a swaps dealer yet. Take a listen.
Are you saying this is a no man's land? There's nothing, there's things that have not crystallized in a regulatory fashion yet?
Well,
over such a big bank?
The bank is overseen by bank regulators, but under Dodd-Frank, the market regulators, as market regulators, we will stand up and oversee swap dealing activity in a bank or an affiliate of a bank or securities-based swap dealing activity. But you're right, currently the American public is not protected in that way.
And currently, he says they've completed about half of the rules so far that they have been tasked with completing. Let's bring back William K. Black. He is breaking this all down for us and all of the problems with these rules and regulations still. He's Associate Professor of Economics and Law at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. Also played a major role in seeing that bad actors in the savings and loan crisis went to prison. So really, he's someone who has gone after some of these bad actors, unlike any of the officials seem to today. So we had this derivatives hearing today, Professor Black, but could you break down for us, in your view, how big of an issue it is, these over-the-counter derivatives that are unregulated, opaque, and perhaps more importantly, not priced by the market, as in an exchange-traded future?
Yeah, these are immensely important, and they were a major cause of the ongoing global crisis, and they are odds-on favorite to cause the next global crisis. And the Volcker Rule is one of the essential aspects to dealing with it. So to back up a bit, in the last year of the Clinton administration, a bipartisan group got together at the behest of the industry to crush Brooks Liborn, who was then the chair of the Commodities Future Trading Commission, and warning about credit default swaps. And the act that was passed, the Commodities Future Modernization Act of 2000, forbade the CFTC from issuing any rules to protect the nation, even exempted credit default swaps from state anti-fraud laws. If you can believe that, passing something that said you could actually commit fraud. So that was the huge outrageous thing. And if Dodd-Frank had been serious, there would have been a one sentence in it instead of 600 pages that said, Commodities Future Modernization Act is repealed. But they didn't do that. But they did do two compromises. One is the Volcker Rule that we've discussed. The other was saying this world of over-the-counter derivatives is completely opaque, vastly dangerous. You must do it through a clearinghouse. Now, that is not a fix as to the systemic risk they cause, but at least it makes it less opaque.
Yeah. It's also not a fix as to risk, as we've seen with MF Global, which did operate with some on an exchange for a lot of their customers. But my question for you on the Volcker Rule or any other regulation in the pipeline, would any of that keep a bank from, say, moving money to London, where shadow banking is less regulated, or to the Mauritius Islands, as Gary Gensler mentioned in his testimony today, and doing as they please and getting around the rule?
Yes. First, there would have been four things that could have stopped this. First, if Glass-Steagall was not repealed, it would have been unlawful. Second, if the Commodities Future Modernization Act was not passed, it likely would have been banned by Brooks Liborn. Third, if the Volcker Rule were in place And it isn't because J.P. Morgan has led the charge to delay the effectiveness of the rule. And if the rule actually met the intent of Congress, which it in a current draft does not, again, because of J.P. Morgan's effective lobbying with Treasury and the Fed, then you couldn't have done it under the Volcker rule. And if the requirements for the clearinghouse were in effect, they couldn't have made these investments either, because when they eventually bet on this particular derivative of a derivative that caused a disaster, this was not something that would have ever gone successfully on a clearinghouse.
Aha, that's a very key point. Before we go, we just have a minute, but just so that everybody is clear, we know the benefit of derivatives to these bankers who basically can make a lot of money and paper profits while things are going well. And then when things blow up, we know who's on the line. It's all of us if it's a systemically important institution. But just in case anybody is clear or unclear, what purpose do over-the-counter derivatives serve to society?
Virtually none, and they're not systemically important organizations like they deserve a gold star. They're systemically dangerous. The world would be safer, the banks would be more efficient, and we would have a better shot at having democracy returned if they were shrunk massively. Paul Volcker said it well. Just once he wished that some neutral party could provide one shred of evidence that these kinds of derivatives actually make the world better in any way.
Yeah, and I would love to see some evidence now, as I'm sure a lot of people would. I appreciate you being on the show and clearing this all up for us. Thanks so much. That was William Black, Associate Professor at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. All right, let's wrap up with loose change. Dimitri, Shannon, guess who has some serious VIP status? The people that bankroll the USA. The U.S.'s relationship with China as its largest creditor has been the topic of political debate. Even Saturday night jabs. Take a look.
In fact, now that I think about it, it is your country that owes us a large sum of money. Is this correct?
Yes.
Well, now China, holding $1.17 trillion in U.S. Treasury, has a much easier route to purchase more. According to Reuters, the U.S. Treasury has given the People's Bank of China a direct computer link to its auction system. So China is now the first foreign government that just can bypass Wall Street, bypass primary dealers, just go straight to the Treasury, buy more debt. What is this? The U.S. is like, we just want to cut out the middleman. We want to make sure that there is like a, straight to the vein life support.
It sounds to me like what they're doing is they're taking they're saying for everyone else that you want to get smack, you got to go through the dealers on the street. But if you're China, if the U.S. and you want to get your fix, you can go straight to the
source.
Straight to the source, right? Like Denzel Washington in that movie where he played that drug dealer. He went straight to the source in Vietnam or wherever it was. But my point is, maybe this is so that they don't have to pay that extra spread that Goldman makes off of, being a primary broker-dealer. So that could be it.
I mean, to be fair, they should probably get some perk because they do owe a lot of U.S. debt.
I mean, the U.S. has to entice them as best they can because if
Good point.
They don't have China, then they got to monetize more debt.
Good point. Shannon, you want to add anything?
When are the other central banks going to start crying foul?
That's a good point. Do you think other central banks will ask to be hooked up too? And
why would they want that? No, I mean, the people that are going to complain and bitch and moan about this are going to be Goldman
Wall
Sachs,
Street.
J.P. Morgan, Bank of New York Mellon. Any of these primary broker-dealers are going to be upset because they're going to lose the spread, plus they may not be able to front-run the trade because they want to know when it happens because it goes directly to Treasury. So they're the ones that are going to be really upset about this. The central banks don't really care. I don't think. I mean, maybe I'm missing something here, but.
So China is even more VIP than Wall Street cronies, maybe. Moving on, we know the job market is bad, but when it comes to the help wanted ads, it seems that employers want you to be one of these overwhelmingly. Take a look. So according to the Wall Street Journal, and this is kind of weird, I don't even know what to make of this, the number of job listings with the term ninja have increased 2,500% in the past 6 years. And Jedis are wanted too. Employers seeking those have increased by 67% in the same period. Rock stars have increased by 810%. So rock star, I get. People want rock star employees. Ninjas, I don't get.
Well, I mean, maybe, you know, ninja loans were the no job income or asset loans. So maybe this is kind of a play off that. It's like you're not really hiring someone. They're trying to get in through the radar, some accounting ploy for Wall Street. You know, you never know with these guys. But it could also be this desire, this real desire to return to this fantasy world, you know, with, you know, Star Wars, Jedi Knights, ninjas, this kind of fantasy world where we don't want to live in the real world and have real jobs anymore. We want to be Jedis or ninjas.
No. Or how about this? We did that story in Australia about how Hell's Angels were being contracted to collect debts.
You think so?
Maybe,
really?
Maybe employers need ninjas to collect on debts. Let's ask Shannon.
I'm a ninja.
Oh, God. I had no idea about this.
Is this for some...
I'm also a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle variety, but, I mean, I'm pretty sure I'd get hired.
Well,
you look more like one of the
are you in the market for another job? Is that what this ninja mask is about?
Shannon,
is that what you're trying to tell us?
You look more like one of the guests at Eyes Wide Shut for our 85% male-dominated
I know, you
audience.
can't even tell I have eye holes in this thing, but, you know.
No, I don't know if you've seen that movie. Have you seen Eyes Wide Shut?
I have not.
All right, well, our audience sure has.
We'll leave that to our audience to go check it out. Really quickly, we don't have time for the soundbite. Maybe you could play the footage while I'm talking about it, because before we go, just you should know that the first private spacecraft, there it is,
that's symbolic
also.
also.
Blasted off for the ISS. Our country is broke. It can no longer fund NASA, or not to the extent it once did. So there's privatization taking off before your eyes. We'll leave you with that.
Yeah, that's, well, I'm not gonna, I'll let it go.
Right.
I won't go there, I won't touch it.
Let it go, Dimitri. Let that beautiful image carry us out. That's all we have time for. Thanks so much for watching, and please make sure to come back tomorrow. In the meantime, you can follow me on Twitter at Lauren Lister and give us feedback on the show or catch any of the shows you missed at youtube.com/CapitalAccount. And from everyone here, thanks for watching and have a great night.